The average Western household throws away roughly 30% of the food it buys. Not 30% of the food that goes bad, 30% of everything. Money spent at the supermarket, carried home, and eventually transferred directly to the bin without ever becoming a meal. Japan has a word, mottainai, that has no direct English translation. It expresses a feeling of regret over waste, not environmental concern or economic logic, but a genuine emotional response to the idea that something with value has been discarded before that value was fully realized. That feeling shapes how Japanese home cooks approach every leftover, every surplus ingredient, every scrap that in a Western kitchen would be heading for the bin. Nothing with culinary value goes to waste because waste itself is understood as a failure. Not a moral one, but a practical one. A failure of creativity, of planning, of understanding what an ingredient can still become. Here are 21 of those habits. 1. They plan tomorrow's lunch before they serve tonight's dinner. Before the food goes on the table, a portion is set aside, not the scraps. A deliberate portion, placed in a container that goes into the fridge before the meal begins. Tomorrow's lunch is already made before tonight's dinner is eaten. This eliminates the daily cost of buying lunch outside for every member of the family. Leftovers have a destination before they even become leftovers. They are not sitting in the fridge, hoping someone will want them tomorrow. They are already spoken for. 2. They turn leftover rice into fried rice. Cold leftover rice is actively better for fried rice than freshly cooked rice. The cold and slightly dry grains fry rather than steam in the pan, producing the caramelized individual grain texture that good fried rice requires. Fresh rice produces clumpy, wet fried rice. Leftover rice produces perfect fried rice. Egg, soy sauce, a drop of sesame oil, whatever vegetables or protein needs using. Leftover rice becomes the base of a complete meal in under 10 minutes that tastes better than rice reheated and served plain. 3. They make ochazuke from the last scraps of rice. When the leftover rice is not enough for fried rice, a small amount at the bottom of the container, hot green tea or warm dashi is poured directly over it until submerged. A pickled plum in the center, torn nori on top, sesame seeds, a drop of soy sauce. The hot liquid softens the rice into something between a soup and a porridge. Warm, savory, deeply satisfying, and assembled from what most Western cooks would rinse down the sink. 4. They use leftover miso soup as a cooking liquid. Leftover miso soup from breakfast becomes the cooking liquid for lunch. The dashi and miso base makes it an extraordinarily good braising liquid for vegetables, a poaching liquid for eggs, or a base for a second soup made with whatever else needs using. Miso soup poured over leftover rice and simmered gently for 5 minutes with an egg cracked in at the end is zosui, Japanese rice porridge, made entirely from things already cooked and would otherwise have been poured away. 5. They pickle vegetables that are about to turn. A vegetable one day from being thrown away is in a Japanese kitchen an ingredient at the peak of its pickling potential. Slice it, salt it at 2% of its weight, press it under something heavy for a few hours. What comes out lasts weeks, fills the pickle component of any meal, and costs nothing beyond vegetables already going to be discarded. The waste becomes the ingredient. Nothing reaches the bin while it still has culinary value. 6. They make stock from everything. The outer leaves of a cabbage, the stems of mushrooms, the green tops of spring onions, the bones from last night's fish. Japanese home cooks keep a container in the freezer for vegetable scraps. When it is full, everything goes into a pot with water and kombu, simmers for 30 minutes, and the resulting stock goes back into the freezer. The container of scraps costs nothing. The stock it produces flavors weeks of future cooking. 7. They repurpose leftover fish into furikake. Leftover grilled fish gets flaked and dried in a pan with soy sauce, mirin, sake, and sesame seeds until completely dry and crumbly. The result is furikake, a rice seasoning that keeps for weeks and transforms plain rice into something deeply flavored and complete. Leftover fish that would have been thrown away the following morning becomes a seasoning ingredient that flavors dozens of future meals. Most people pay several dollars for this in a jar at the supermarket. 8. They use leftover noodles in completely different applications. cold water run over leftover noodles separates them. A little sesame oil prevents further sticking. They become the base for cold sesame noodles dressed with ponzu, or crispy noodle cakes fried flat in a pan, or dropped into fresh dashi broth with miso and whatever protein is available. The noodle is already cooked. The dish is different enough from the original that nobody experiences it as an obvious leftover. 9. They never pour away cooking water. The water used to boil vegetables contains water-soluble vitamins, minerals, and vegetable flavor that make it significantly more useful than plain water for any subsequent cooking task. Potato water contains starch that gives body to sauces. Vegetable water flavors rice and soups. Blanching water from greens goes back into a broth. Every liquid that tastes of something is a future cooking ingredient rather than a waste product. 10. They transform leftover tempura. Leftover tempura loses its crispness and seems like a casualty of its own nature. Japanese home cooks place it over hot rice and dress it with sweet soy sauce, tendon, where the coating softens and absorbs the sauce into something dense and deeply flavorful. Or they crumble the pieces into a new batter with fresh vegetables and refry as fritters, transforming yesterday's leftovers into a completely new dish. 11. They use leftover proteins as onigiri fillings. Any leftover protein has an immediate destination. A leftover salmon flaked with soy sauce, leftover chicken with kewpie, leftover tuna with miso. Each filling goes into the center of a rice ball, pressed into shape, wrapped in nori. Tomorrow's portable complete lunch assembled from whatever needed using tonight. 12. They make end-of-week soup. Friday evening is when everything accumulated through the week, the half-used daikon, the remaining mushrooms, the piece of tofu that needs finishing, the small amount of leftover chicken, goes into a single pot with dashi and miso. The soup changes every Friday because the ingredients change every week. It is never quite the same twice. It always tastes deeply satisfying because miso and dashi make any combination of simple ingredients taste cohesive and complete. It clears the fridge before the weekend shop and feeds the family from what would otherwise have been 5 separate items wasted as individual remnants. 13. They use leftover rice as a binding agent. Cold leftover rice mixed with vegetables, egg, and a little flour or panko forms patties that pan-fry into crispy, satisfying cakes. The rice binds the patty while the exterior crisps in the pan, seasoned with soy sauce and ginger, finished with ponzu or tonkatsu sauce, a complete meal from leftover rice that tastes nothing like reheated rice. 14. They use the last of every bottle. When a soy sauce bottle is almost empty, sake, mirin, and a little sugar go directly into the bottle, shaken, and used as an instant marinade. The last of every jar of miso gets dissolved into a soup. The remaining sesame paste gets whisked into a dressing with rice vinegar and dashi. Nothing that coats the interior of a container is considered used until the container itself is clean. 15. They make tamago tsuji from leftover soup. Any broth-based soup that has not quite enough for a full second serving gets a beaten egg stirred in while simmering. The egg creates soft, silky ribbons throughout the liquid, adding protein and volume, and producing a dish that feels more substantial than the thin broth it started as. A leftover portion that would not have satisfied anyone becomes a complete serving with 1 egg and 30 seconds. 16. They never discard nabe broth. Nabe hot pot produces a broth of extraordinary depth by the end of the meal. Every ingredient cooked in it has contributed flavor to the liquid. Japanese home cooks add cooked rice or noodles to the remaining broth at the end of the meal, absorbing the remaining liquid and flavor completely. Or they refrigerate it and use it as the base of the following day's soup or simmered dish. The broth from one nabe feeds multiple meals. Nothing is poured away. 17. They repurpose leftover salad dressing. Leftover ponzu becomes the braising liquid for fish. Leftover sesame dressing becomes a marinade for chicken. Leftover miso dressing becomes a glaze for grilled vegetables. Dressing is concentrated flavor, acid, salt, umami, fat. All of those components are as useful in cooking contexts as they are in salad contexts. The tablespoon left at the bottom of the bowl is an ingredient waiting for a different application, not a thing to be wiped out and discarded. 18. They turn stale bread into panko. Bread a day or two past fresh gets broken into irregular flakes and stored in the freezer, used as a coating for fried foods, a topping for gratins, a binder for patties. Shop-bought panko costs money. Stale bread costs nothing. The result in most applications is identical. 19. They cook rice with tomorrow's fried rice in mind. The best fried rice comes from rice refrigerated for at least a day. Japanese home cooks cook slightly more rice than needed for dinner, specifically intending to make chahan the following evening. One cooking session produces 2 different meals. The surplus is not an accident. It is part of the plan. 20. They maintain a running pickle jar. A jar or small container where vegetable odds and ends go rather than the bin. Cucumber ends, carrot peels, daikon offcuts, cabbage outer leaves. Combined with salt and a little rice vinegar, they ferment into a rough pickle that improves over days and weeks. The jar never empties entirely. It is replenished continuously with whatever is being trimmed in the kitchen. The pickles produced from it cost nothing, last indefinitely, and fill the pickle component of every meal for free. 21. They practice motenai as a daily intention. Everything on this list flows from one habit, pausing before discarding anything and asking what else it could become, not as a complex system. Just a brief moment of consideration before the bin is reached. Could this liquid become a broth? Could this scrap become a stock? Could this vegetable become a pickle? Could this surplus become tomorrow's lunch? The answer is almost always yes. The only thing required to reach that answer is the habit of asking the question. Motenai is not a cooking technique. It is an orientation toward food, a way of seeing every ingredient as something whose value has not yet been fully realized, rather than something whose useful life is finished. Japanese home cooks do not waste food because they have been taught to feel something about waste that most Western kitchens have not. Not guilt, not obligation, just the quiet, practical awareness that the thing in front of them is still worth something, and that finding what it is worth is simply part of what cooking is. 21 habits. None of them complicated. All of them practiced daily in Japanese kitchens as automatically as washing hands before cooking. The 30% of food your household currently throws away does not have to go anywhere. It just needs to be looked at differently. Japan has been looking at it differently for centuries.